fear of falling. I described my days as a student janitor on a working scholarship at Cleveland College, mainly an adult education center on Public Square in downtown Cleveland during the last years of the Great Depression. It includes the episode in which Gene and I first met. Like most college graduates, I'm fond of my alma mater, though it exists only in historical records and the memories of those who attended it. In 1939, when I entered Cleveland College on a working scholarship, it seemed solid enough to last for centuries. A 7-storied stone building on Public Square, the center of downtown Cleveland, with stout Roman goddesses supporting the balconies on its facade. And its hallways, elevators, and classrooms were crowded with students, enrolled less for a degree than for courses to abet their knowledge of culture or to provide skills necessary for employment or a better job. Each year, 20 students from the Cleveland area were granted scholarships like mine, and we made up the majority of the full-time students. The Depression had not yet lifted, and without those scholarships, few, if any of us, could have attended college. In our first year, we had no work assignments, but as sophomores and upper-class students, some of us were elevator operators during the evening rush hours, while others sold textbooks or supported the staff in the mailroom, the publicity office, or the telephone switchboard. Although other students were later to join me, I was the first to serve as a janitorial assistant, and it seemed likely that the initial task that Joe Wilkes, the head custodian, gave me was simply an attempt to find something to occupy my allotted work hours. As instructed, I reported to him at 7 a.m. on a Monday morning. He led me to the basement locker room for women students, connected to the sinks and toilet stalls of the adjoining restroom by an archway, a big archway, without doors. My task was to dust off the tops of the 10 to 12 rows of lockers before the first woman arrived. It embarrassed me to be assigned such a task, not because of its humble nature, but I was a male in a place where I didn't belong. To complete the chore as quickly as I could, I used Joe's tall stepladder to climb to the top of each row. Moving on my knees, I sent a cloud of sooty dust and filaments of spider webs into the air and into my lungs. Despite my haste, the first young woman arrived before I was finished. Dismayed by her presence, I imagined she would be alarmed to find a man crouched on a locker above her head, a filthy rag in his hand. And so I called out to her as cheerfully as I could, "Don't mind me, I'm just working my way through college." Those words were the first ones I spoke to the slender and dark-haired girl I came to love. England and France had just declared war on Germany, but I, like most other Americans, felt our country safe from foreign strife. Throughout the years of my public schooling, I've been taught again and again the folly of warfare, with World War I as a prime example. A few weeks before my graduation from college, I was an infantry private in the Army, my degree awarded in absentia. Jean, that slender, dark-haired girl, and I, drawn together over the years as members of the college newspaper's editorial staff, were married on the furlough I was granted just before my division embarked for Europe. The convoy arrived in Cherbourg a few days after the Normandy beachheads had been secured. Serving as an obedient neophyte on a janitorial staff is not a bad preparation for service as an Army private. For example, my experience helped me pass inspection whenever a platoon lieutenant put on white gloves to test for dust on the frame of my bed or in the corners of the heist window behind it. Impressed by my speed in dusting locker tops, Joe Wilkes promoted me to the crew of custodians that on Saturday mornings washed and polished the tiles of the first floor lobby and wide corridors. And that experience proved pertinent in the Army too. Accompanied by the music of a radio playing at full volume, The rhythmic movements of the Saturday morning floor cleaning squad had something in common with my infantry division's parade drills, during which row after row of soldiers stepped to the beat of Sousa marches, and for that matter with Tolstoy's depiction in Anna Karenina of the growing pleasure that Levin, surely the author's alter ego here, feels in joining in the line of peasants scything a field. 2 or 3 full-time custodians and I first mopped the floor with a solution of water and trisodium phosphate. I think that's been outlawed. And then, while the tiles were still wet, we moved in unison down the halls, rubbing the abrasive pads attached to our shoe soles against gum and other substances still marring the surface. Ultimately, after rinsing the floors with clean water, we waxed and buffed them. Before we left for the day, we admired our joint accomplishments, transitory though such shining floors were. I felt so joined to my fellow janitors that the following year I founded an organization of student and full-time custodians, Eta Mu Sigma, the Greek letters representing the Elevator and Maintenance Society. I had joined a social fraternity, but when Jean said that yes, she'd like to have my fraternity pin, I gave her the one I valued far more, the society's pin, with the image of a mop and a bucket embossed in silver-colored metal. She lost it. I don't know if Joe himself was unwilling to do it, or if the other full-time custodians had refused, but he chose me, so much younger, and hence slimmer and more limber than the others, as the most capable janitor for a special task. The thousands of pigeons that lived on Public Square roosted at night on the surrounding buildings. Many of them roosted on the 5th floor ledge of Cleveland College. The art studio was on that floor, and the art teachers and their students were bothered by the stench of pigeon droppings on the ledge whenever the windows were opened because of heat or paint fumes. My assignment was to climb out one of the windows to scrape the accumulated layers of guano off about 40 feet of ledge. Joe and I arrived at the studio door to discover that an unscheduled class was in session. Fortunately, the door was at the rear, and the studio was a large room. Since the students at their easels were gathered in a semicircle in front, Joe decided our work wouldn't disturb them. And so we entered, bearing our equipment, a scraper, a brush, a pan, and a metal pail, Joe leading me by the heavy rope he had tied to my waist as a safety precaution. From the doorway, we hadn't seen the young woman the students were sketching. Standing on a platform, one arm on the back of a chair, she was the first nude female I'd ever seen. Were her breasts and the rest of her immaculate body really gleaming in the blue spotlights I continue to carry in my memory? Or was that blue glow my subjective response to what I saw? Though I resolutely turned to the task at hand, I was seeing that glow as I stepped out the window onto the ledge. Joe handed me the scraper, brush, and pan once I kneeled outside. With that vision blinded me to all else, I felt no fear, though I doubt that Joe, playing out the rope as I advanced, would have been able to support my weight if I'd fallen. Each time I filled a pan, I returned it to Joe at the open window to dump the dirt into the bucket. So I could have looked at the model again and again, but I didn't. To see her once was a gift granted me by chance. I was no furtive peeping Tom. By the time Joe and I had finished, the modeling session was over. The generations of undergraduates I taught at Cornell in the second half of the last century would have been amused, I imagine, to hear that at their age, their professor's first view of a naked woman enabled him to clean pigeon droppings from a high ledge of a college building without the slightest fear of plunging to his death.